And when Dr. Brooks slid the ink chromatography report across the conference table, Diane Coleman's face went the color of the manila folder sitting in front of her, because the chemical breakdown under that laboratory light proved, in a way no defense attorney could argue around, that the signature on a $500,000 life insurance policy bearing my name had been physically written onto that page, almost 11 months after the date printed beside it. She had forged my signature, forged a notary stamp to go with it, and quietly made herself the sole contingent beneficiary on a policy insuring my life, and she had done it all while smiling at me across a dinner table every single Sunday for nearly a year, asking me to pass the mashed potatoes like nothing in the world was wrong. I watched her hands start to shake as the insurance company's own fraud investigator read the case number out loud, and I felt something in my chest finally unclench. Because for 11 months I had been the only person in that family who knew exactly what she had done, and I had spent every one of those months collecting the proof that was about to end her. My name is Sarah Coleman, I'm 43 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood outside Asheville, North Carolina, in the kind of house with a wraparound porch that made me believe, back when we bought it 9 years ago, that we were building a peaceful life. If you're new here, I want you to know this channel is called Silent Revenge Stories, and it exists for women exactly like me, women who got underestimated by the people who were supposed to love them and who found a quiet, legal, absolutely devastating way to make things right. If this story pulls you in the way I think it will, hit subscribe before you go, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because I read every single one, and honestly, some nights, those comments are the only thing that reminds me I'm not the only woman this has happened to. I married my husband Mark almost 15 years ago, back when I was working as a physical therapist at a clinic in Charlotte, and he was finishing his engineering degree at NC State. His mother, Diane, was a widow by the time I met her, sharp-tongued and proud, the kind of woman who introduced herself at parties as a former bank branch manager like it was a title of nobility. In the beginning, I mistook her bluntness for honesty and her control for love. She picked out the caterer for our wedding without asking me. She had opinions about the nursery colors before I'd even told her I was pregnant, and when Mark and I finally bought our house in Buncombe County, she insisted on being added to the utility accounts, in her words, in case something ever happened to us. I let it go again and again because Mark loved her, because she'd raised him alone after his father died young, and because I told myself that being a good wife meant tolerating a difficult mother-in-law rather than drawing hard lines with her. The first real crack in that assumption showed up almost 2 years ago, on an ordinary Tuesday in October, when I came home from work and found an envelope on our kitchen counter from a company called Carolina Trust Life Insurance. It wasn't addressed to Mark. It was addressed to me, Sarah Coleman, and it referenced a policy number I had never seen before, with an annual premium notice for a $500,000 term life policy that had apparently been active for almost a year. I remember standing in my kitchen reading that letter 3 times, certain there had been some kind of clerical mix-up, because Mark and I did have life insurance through his employer, but nothing close to that size, and nothing through a company I'd never heard of. When I called the number on the letter that evening, the representative confirmed the policy was real, confirmed my name and social security number matched their file, and confirmed that the primary application, including my signature and a notarized spousal consent form, had been submitted and processed the previous November. I want you to sit with that for a second, because that was the moment the ground under me actually shifted. Someone had insured my life for $500,000, using a signature that looked enough like mine to fool an insurance underwriter, and I had absolutely no memory of signing anything. When I finally got Mark's account information straightened out and asked him directly whether he knew anything about it, his confusion looked genuine, and it was, because it turned out he wasn't on the policy at all. He wasn't the beneficiary, he wasn't a signer, he wasn't even listed as a contact. The only 2 names on that application were mine, forged, and his mother's, listed as the sole contingent beneficiary in the event that Mark predeceased me, a legal technicality that, if you thought about it for more than a minute, only made sense if Diane expected to eventually be the one collecting that money directly. I didn't confront her that week. I want to be honest about that, because I think a lot of women in my position would have marched over there with the letter in hand and demanded answers, and looking back, that would have been the worst possible move. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I photographed every page of that letter, saved every email from the insurance company, and started a private folder on my laptop labeled, of all things, home renovation ideas, because I knew Diane occasionally used our shared family cloud account and I did not trust her not to look. Then I called the insurance company back and asked, as calmly as I could manage, for a certified copy of the original application, including the signature page and the notarization. It took 11 days for that packet to arrive, and when it did, I sat at my kitchen table at midnight studying a signature that was almost right. Almost. My real signature has a distinctive loop on the capital R and a flat, quick line under the last name, a habit from years of signing patient charts fast at the clinic. The signature on that application had the loop, but it was slightly too careful, too deliberate, the kind of signature someone produces when they're consciously copying a sample rather than signing their own name from muscle memory. Underneath it, the notarization was signed by a woman named Patricia Hall, listed as a notary public in Henderson County, a name I had never once heard in my life, attached to a stamp that, when I looked up the commission number online through the North Carolina Secretary of State's database, turned out to belong to a completely different notary whose commission had expired 2 years earlier. That's when I opened a new browser tab and searched for certified forensic document examiners near Asheville, and that search is what eventually led me to Dr. Elaine Brooks, a document examiner based out of Charlotte who was certified through the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners and had spent almost 20 years testifying in North Carolina courts on cases involving forged wills, contested checks, and fraudulent contracts. I drove 2 hours to her office with a folder of my known signatures, pulled from old mortgage documents, tax returns, and even a decade of birthday cards I'd signed for Mark, and I asked her to compare them against the signature on that insurance application. She told me it would take about 3 weeks because she wanted to run the question document through several layers of analysis, not just visual comparison, but also an examination of pen pressure, stroke sequence, and eventually, once I gave her the go-ahead, ink composition testing to determine roughly when that ink had actually been laid down on the paper. While I waited for that report, I kept living my normal life, having Sunday dinners at Diane's house, letting her hold my daughter's hand while we walked through the farmer's market, watching her closely in a way I hated, because some part of me still wanted to be wrong about her. But small things started adding up in a way they hadn't before, now that I was actually paying attention. She asked, more than once, in a tone she probably thought was casual, whether Mark and I had updated our wills recently. She mentioned, out of nowhere at a family barbecue, that it was smart for people our age to be overinsured rather than underinsured, in case anything happened. And one Saturday afternoon, while helping her organize a closet, I found a manila folder in the back of a filing cabinet drawer with my full legal name written on the tab in her handwriting, containing photocopies of my driver's license, my social security card, and a bank statement from an account I didn't even know she had access to. I didn't take the folder. I photographed every page with my phone, put it back exactly where I found it, and drove home shaking so hard I had to pull over twice. 3 weeks later, Dr. Brooks called me into her office and laid out a report that would have been almost funny if it hadn't been so terrifying. Through indentation analysis on the original pages, using a technique called electrostatic detection, she was able to recover faint impressions from a notepad that had apparently been sitting under the application when it was filled out, impressions that spelled out, in Diane's own handwriting style, several practice attempts at my signature. The ink chromatography results were even more damning, showing that the specific ink formulation used for my supposed signature had only been manufactured and distributed starting in a particular quarter, a full 10 months after the date printed at the top of the application, which meant the entire document had been backdated. In Dr. Brooks's professional opinion, delivered in writing on official letterhead, the probability that I had signed that application was, in her words, negligible to the point of exclusion. That report gave me something Diane never once suspected I had: real, admissible, laboratory-grade proof, and I made a decision right there in that office that I was not going to waste it on a screaming match at a family dinner. I was going to build a complete case, quietly, methodically, the same way she had built her fraud, and I was going to make sure that when it finally came out, there would be no room for her to spin it, minimize it, or turn it around on me the way she had turned nearly every other conflict in that family around on someone else for the better part of 2 decades. Here's where the story gets even more unsettling, because Dr. Brooks's report wasn't the only thing that surfaced during that stretch of digging. Mark's younger brother, Tyler, mentioned almost offhandedly during a phone call that his mother had co-signed, or so he thought, a truck loan for him 3 years earlier, one that had mysteriously gone into his name alone with no memory of him actually signing the final paperwork at the dealership. When I asked him to pull his loan documents and send me photos, The signature on his application had that same slightly too careful quality, and a notarization from, once again, Patricia Hall, the notary whose commission had expired years before any of these documents claimed to be signed. Diane wasn't a one-time opportunist. She had built a pattern, a quiet, patient habit of forging documents across her own family, and I was apparently only the most recent chapter. I brought that discovery to an elder fraud attorney named Victoria Pierce, a Charlotte-based lawyer who specialized in exactly this kind of family financial exploitation case, and she listened to the whole story without interrupting once, then told me something I've thought about every day since. She said financial predators inside families count on shame to protect them, because victims don't want to believe someone who shares their holidays could also be robbing them, and that shame is worth more to a predator than any lock or password. Victoria helped me file a formal complaint with the North Carolina Department of Insurance, request a full fraud investigation from Carolina Trust Life, and, because the forged signatures and fabricated notarization crossed clearly into criminal territory, coordinate with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office, where a detective named Reyes was assigned to the case. I want to pause here because we're at the halfway point of everything I have to tell you, and I need you to understand that everything up to now, the letter, the forged signature, the fake notary, Tyler's truck loan, was only the setup. The real ending, the one where Diane finally sits across a table from me with absolutely no idea how much I already know, is still coming, and when it arrives, it involves a recorded phone call, a fraud investigator flying in from Raleigh, and a moment at Thanksgiving dinner that none of us will ever forget. For the next several weeks, Detective Reyes and the insurance company's internal fraud unit worked in parallel, subpoenaing records from the dealership where Tyler's truck loan originated, pulling security footage from the bank branch where the insurance premiums had been auto-drafted from an account Diane controlled, and formally deposing the real Patricia Hall, who confirmed under oath that her notary stamp had been photographed off an old document years earlier and had never once been used by her on anything related to my family. North Carolina is a one-party consent state for recorded conversations, which Victoria explained to me carefully, which meant that when Diane called me one evening, agitated and strange, asking whether I'd received any unusual mail lately, I was legally allowed to record the entire call on my phone, and I did. On that recording, she never confessed outright, she was too careful for that. But she asked 3 separate times whether I had opened anything from an insurance company, a level of specific paranoia that Detective Reyes later told me was exactly the kind of consciousness of guilt that helps build a criminal case. Around that same time, I had a close call that still makes my stomach drop when I think about it. Diane showed up unannounced one afternoon while I was on a video call with Dr. Brooks, reviewing the final version of the forensic report on my laptop screen, and I had to angle the screen shut and walk into the garage, telling her I needed to take a work call, while my heart pounded so hard I thought she could hear it from across the driveway. She stayed for 45 minutes, chatting with my daughter about nothing, completely unaware that the woman she was making small talk with had, at that exact moment, a certified forensic document examiner on hold and a criminal detective's direct cell phone number saved under a fake contact name in case Diane ever went through my phone. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, everything was in place. Detective Reyes had enough for an arrest warrant on charges of forgery, uttering a forged instrument, and insurance fraud, but he agreed, at Victoria's request and mine, to hold off serving it until after one final family gathering, because I wanted Diane to hear the truth from me first, in front of Mark, before any officer walked through that door. Mark, once I finally told him everything, sat in stunned silence for almost 10 full minutes at our kitchen table, staring at Dr. Brooks's report, at Tyler's loan documents, at the transcript of the recorded call, and then he looked up at me and said the only thing that mattered, which was that he believed every word, and that he was done protecting her from consequences she had built entirely by herself. That Thanksgiving, Diane arrived at our house carrying a green bean casserole and her usual air of quiet superiority, completely unaware that a fraud investigator from Carolina Trust Life was parked 2 streets over in an unmarked car, that Detective Reyes had the warrant folded in his jacket pocket, and that I had printed, laminated, and organized every single piece of evidence into a binder sitting on the sideboard behind her chair. We made it through the meal itself, because I wanted my children to eat their turkey in peace. But once the plates were cleared, I asked her to sit back down at the table, and I slid that binder in front of her, open to the ink chromatography report, and I told her, as calmly as I have ever said anything in my life, that I knew everything that I had known for months, and that I had proof strong enough to put her signature analysis into a courtroom. I watched her face cycle through every stage of denial in about 90 seconds. First confusion, then irritation, then a brittle laugh, and finally, when I opened the folder to Tyler's forged loan documents and told her the real Patricia Hall had already given a sworn deposition, something in her simply collapsed. She started talking fast, saying she'd only ever wanted to protect the family's assets, that she never meant for anyone to get hurt, that it was all going to work out fine in the end if we would just let her explain, and that's when Detective Reyes knocked on the front door, right on schedule, and my son ran to answer it before I could stop him, and Diane Coleman was placed under arrest in my dining room. In front of the 2 grandchildren she had spent years insisting she loved more than anything. The legal process that followed took nearly 10 months, and I won't pretend it was simple or clean, because there is nothing simple about watching your own mother-in-law face criminal charges, or about the version of your husband's family that fractures quietly under the weight of it, some relatives siding with her, insisting it was a misunderstanding, others going completely silent, unwilling to pick a side at all. But the evidence never wavered, because evidence doesn't care about family loyalty. Diane ultimately pleaded guilty to insurance fraud and forgery in exchange for a reduced sentence that included restitution, a permanent injunction preventing her from acting on my behalf or Tyler's in any financial capacity ever again, and formal probation with regular check-ins from a court-appointed officer. Carolina Trust Life voided the fraudulent policy entirely, refunded every premium that had been drafted from Diane's account, which meant, satisfyingly, that she paid for the entire scheme herself and got nothing back for it, and the North Carolina Department of Insurance opened a broader review into Patricia Hall's stolen notary identity that ended up connecting to 2 other unrelated fraud cases across the state. I think about that Thanksgiving dinner often, not with anger anymore, but with a strange, settled kind of peace, because I spent almost a year being the only person who knew the truth while everyone else at that table thought I was simply a slightly quiet, slightly tired daughter-in-law who didn't say much. What none of them understood was that I wasn't quiet because I had nothing to say. I was quiet because I was building a case brick by brick, with a forensic document examiner, a detective, an attorney, and a folder labeled home renovation ideas that never once contained a single paint swatch. Mark and I are still married, stronger now in some ways than we were before, because nothing tests a marriage quite like discovering your spouse's parent tried to profit from your death and coming out the other side together. Tyler has since had his truck loan reissued properly in his own name, with his own signature, and he checks in with me now more than he ever did before, mostly, I think, because he finally understands what it looks like when someone actually fights for the people Diane spent years quietly exploiting. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's that being the calm one, the patient one, the woman who doesn't raise her voice at the dinner table, is not the same thing as being powerless. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to someone who has underestimated you for years is simply outwork them, outdocument them, and outpatience them, until the day comes when you can lay the entire truth on the table and watch them realize, all at once, that you knew everything long before they ever suspected it. If this story meant something to you, if any part of it reminded you of your own mother-in-law, your own quiet year of collecting proof, or your own moment of finally being believed, I want to hear about it. So subscribe to Silent Revenge Stories if you haven't already, and leave a comment telling me the one lesson you're taking away from tonight, because those comments are what keep this community going, and I promise you, every single one of you watching right now is not alone in this.